Imagine a world where the heroes of space exploration are not only men in white suits, but also women, mathematicians, engineers, pioneers who calculated trajectories, programmed computers, and risked their lives to push the boundaries of humanity. Yet their names have often been erased from history books, their faces forgotten behind the scenes of the great narratives. Today, we will rediscover these unsung heroines, from NASA's black female computers to Soviet cosmonauts, who paved the way for equality in the stars, despite prejudice, discrimination, and obstacles. In the 1950s and 1960s, as the Cold War raged, two superpowers fought a fierce battle for space conquest. But behind the rockets and satellites, another battle was being fought, that of women for their place in a world dominated by men. Their story is one of a silent but determined struggle to break through the glass ceiling, even 400 kilometers above the Earth. Let's start with the women who did all the calculations, without whom man would never have walked on the moon, NASA's female mathematicians. Their story is one of light and shadow, of invisibility and belated recognition, but also of a quiet revolution that forever changed the face of science and space exploration. To understand their role, we must go back to the origins of NASA, in a segregated America where Jim Crow laws imposed strict racial separation. In this context, a group of brilliant black women mathematicians played a key role in the space race. Their story is one of determination, resilience, and pure talent, which enabled America to beat the USSR in the race to the moon. But before delving into their story, it is important to understand the context in which they lived. The 1960s were marked by intense racial and social tensions in the United States. Women, and black women in particular, faced double discrimination because of their gender and their skin color. In this context, working at NASA, even in subordinate roles, represented a rare and precious opportunity. These women seized this chance and, against all odds, became the invisible architects of the space race. In an inconspicuous NASA building in Langley, Virginia, a team of African-American female mathematicians worked behind the scenes. Their mission? To calculate the trajectories of space missions by hand, a vital task at a time when computers were still in their infancy. Among them, Katherine Johnson stands out. Her work on the trajectories for the Apollo 11 mission will be decisive in bringing Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the moon in 1969. Yet for decades, her name will remain unknown to the general public. Katherine Johnson was not an exception. Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, and Christine Darden were also among these human computers who helped the United States win the space race. Their story, popularized by the film Hidden Figures, is one of a daily struggle against racism and sexism. Imagine, these women not only had to prove their competence in a hostile environment, but also fight for rights as basic as being able to use the same cafeteria as their white colleagues. Their work began in the 1940s when NACA, the predecessor of NASA, recruited black women to perform complex calculations by hand. At the time, electronic computers did not yet exist, and engineers needed people who could solve differential equations to design airplanes and, later, rockets. These women, often graduates of black colleges such as Virginia State University or Howard University, were recruited for their exceptional mathematical skills. Katherine Johnson, for example, was a prodigy. She finished high school at age 14 and graduated from college at age 18. In 1953, she joined NACA, where she was assigned to the trajectory calculations section. Her work was so accurate that John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth, insisted that she personally verify the computer's calculations before his flight in 1962. He reportedly said, "If she says it's okay, then I'm ready to go." But their struggle was not limited to mathematics. These women also had to face racial segregation. At Langley, the restrooms and cafeterias were segregated, and black women were often relegated to offices in remote areas. Dorothy Vaughan, who became NACA's first black supervisor, had to fight for a promotion and equal pay with her male colleagues. Mary Jackson, meanwhile, had to obtain special permission to attend evening classes at a university reserved for white people in order to become an engineer. Their legacy is immense. Without their precise calculations, the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions would never have taken off. However, It wasn't until the 2010s that their contribution was finally recognized, when President Barack Obama awarded Katherine Johnson the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015. Their story reminds us that progress is not only measured in miles traveled in space, but also in barriers broken on Earth. But their fight does not end there. Even today, women and minorities are underrepresented in the sciences. Their story reminds us that progress is not only measured in miles traveled in space, but also in barriers broken on Earth. They paved the way for generations of scientists, proving that genius has no color or gender. Yet despite their contributions, these women were erased from official accounts for decades. It was not until 2016, with the release of the book and film Hidden Figures, that their story was finally brought to the screen and recognized by the general public. This delay in recognition raises an important question. How many other stories of women scientists remain in the shadows? On June 16, 1963, Valentina Terechkova, a 26-year-old textile worker, became the first woman to travel into space aboard Vostok 6. Her flight, which lasted nearly 3 days, was a triumph for the USSR, which once again beat the United States in the space race. However, behind this victory lay a much darker reality. Valentina Terechkova was not chosen for her scientific skills, but because she fit the ideal profile according to the Soviet authorities: young, beautiful, and from a modest background. Her training was rushed, and the risks of the mission were downplayed. During her flight, she suffered from nausea and intense physical pain, but she did not dare mention it at the base for fear of being judged too weak for the task. Upon her return, instead of being celebrated as a hero, she was criticized for expressing her difficulties. The Soviet authorities even banned her from returning to space, fearing that she would damage the image of the space program. Her story is that of a woman who had to fight not only against the limitations of technology, but also against gender stereotypes. Yet Valentina Terechkova remained an icon. Today, at over 80 years old, she continues to promote space exploration and gender equality in science. Her flight paved the way for other female cosmonauts, such as Svetlana Savitskaya, who became the first woman to perform a spacewalk in 1984. But it would be decades before women were fully accepted into space crews. The Soviet space program, despite sending the first woman into space, remained deeply sexist. Female cosmonauts were often seen as political symbols rather than scientists in their own right. Valentina Terechkova herself had to wait years before she was fully recognized for her skills. After her flight, she was used as a propaganda tool by the Soviet regime, traveling the world to promote the merits of communism. Yet she continued to fight for women's rights in science, becoming an iconic figure in the struggle for equality. Her story raises important questions about the role of women in space exploration. Why did it take until 1983 for another woman, Sally Ride, to fly in space on the American side? Why were female cosmonauts overshadowed by their male counterparts? And how does their legacy influence current generations of astronauts? Today, Valentina Terechkova is still active in promoting science and gender equality. She has stated on several occasions that her greatest hope is to see a woman walk on the moon. With NASA's Artemis program, which plans to send the first woman to the moon by 2025, her dream may well come true. But her story also reminds us that space exploration is not just about technology and science. It is also about society, human rights, and equality. Women have always been involved in space exploration, but their contributions have often been downplayed or ignored. It is time to pay tribute to them and ensure that future generations of scientists and astronauts, regardless of gender, have the same opportunities to contribute to this extraordinary adventure. Today, astronauts such as Peggy Whitson, who holds the record for the longest time spent in space by an American, and Samantha Cristoforetti, the first Italian woman in space, prove that women have their place among the stars. However, challenges remain. Women still make up only 20% of space crews, and they often face persistent prejudice. Peggy Whitson, for example, had to fight against the idea that women were less physically fit for space missions. She ultimately commanded the International Space Station twice, proving that gender has nothing to do with competence. Samantha Cristoforetti, meanwhile, has become a modern icon, sharing her daily life on the ISS on social media, and inspiring thousands of young girls to pursue careers in science. But the road to equality is still long. Space suits, for example, are still designed primarily for male bodies, and female astronauts often have to adapt to ill-fitting equipment. In 2019, the first all-female spacewalk had to be canceled due to a lack of suits that fit astronauts in McLean and Christina Koch. This incident highlighted a long-standing problem. Space equipment is often designed without taking into account the specific morphological characteristics of women. In addition, long-duration space missions pose specific challenges for women, such as the effects of radiation on their reproductive health. Studies on these topics are still limited, as most research has been conducted on men. This raises important ethical and scientific questions. How can we ensure the safety and well-being of female astronauts on extended missions, such as a trip to Mars? However, things are changing. Initiatives such as Women in Aerospace and She Space encourage young girls to pursue careers in science. And with projects like Artemis, which plans to send the first woman to the moon by 2025, the future of space exploration could finally be female. But for this to become a reality, we must continue to break down stereotypes and promote equal opportunities. As Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, said, "Young girls need role models. They can't be what they don't see." Today, thanks to pioneers like Katherine Johnson, Valentina Terechkova, Peggy Whitson, and Samantha Cristoforetti, young girls are finally seeing that space is a place for them too. So, is gender parity possible among the stars? The answer depends on us. Because space exploration should not be an adventure reserved for a male elite, but a collective quest that reflects the diversity and talent of all humanity. And perhaps one day, when we look back on the early days of space exploration, we will wonder how we could have forgotten, even for a moment, the essential role women played in this epic journey. In the meantime, their legacy continues to inspire. Every time a rocket takes off, every time an astronaut sets foot on a new planet, we must remember those who made it all possible. Because as Katherine Johnson said, we did what we had to do when we had to do it, and we did it well. And it is this determination, passion, and courage that will continue to guide us to the stars.